of your pelvic floor as muscles, right? So they're muscles and they're shaped like a bowl. Okay, so just like a fruit bowl, right? You'd put fruit in that bowl. So think about 3 fruits you'd put in there. At the front fruit is your bladder, the middle is going to be your vagina, and then the back is going to be your rectum, all in that bowl. And then on top of that, you have your uterus, which is over top of it in your cervix.
Okay, yeah. Hello, welcome back to the Evergreen RX. I'm Hayden, licensed mental health therapist, Cancer Moon, and the first to get deep at any party. And today we are joined by Dr. Mary Grimberg. She has a doctorate in physical therapy, hosts the Sex and Wellness podcast with Dr. Mary, and is the owner of a physical therapy clinic in Austin, Texas called Resilient RX. We love the name.
Yes.
And Mary makes educational content online to destigmatize the conversation around pelvic floor health, women's health issues, and she always has a dose of humor in there, so she makes a really good follow. Mary also likes to spend her time practicing the piano, sometimes dabbling in some stand-up comedy, so what more could you want from your physical therapist?
Well, thank you so much for having me.
So I can give listeners like a little bit of an overview of what we're hoping you guys walk away from this episode with. Just starting basic with understanding like what the pelvic floor is and why it's important and how it plays a role in the larger picture of our well-being. And then, talking about common issues related to pelvic floor health and how to address them, some things with like pain that women experience that goes undiagnosed sometimes for a long time. And just overall how to feel more comfortable in connecting with their body and discussing their own experience to receive support from people. What do you think, like basics 101 pelvic floor, what can you tell? Knowing that most of the people listening are women around my age that, at least in terms of the people I've kind of surveyed, friends I've talked to, we don't know anything.
Yeah, and that's unfortunately very common. But so basically, if you think about it, if you're listening to the video or you're listening to the audio, and, I can just even kind of just show with my hands if you're seeing the video, but basically think of your pelvic floor as muscles, right? So they're muscles and they're shaped like a bowl. Okay, so just like a fruit bowl, right? You'd put fruit in that bowl. So think about 3 fruits you'd put in there.
Do you want me to tell you?
If you want to come up with fruits, that's great. But I was just like, think about 3 fruits, right? So like 1 fruit in the front, we will say like a peach. And then the middle, we can have, I don't know, a banana. And then the back, you have a plum, whatever the point is.
Okay.
And so those are going to be you've got the front fruit is your bladder. The middle is going to be your vagina. And then the back is going to be your rectum, all in that bowl. And then on top of that, you have your uterus, which is over top of it in your cervix.
Okay, yeah.
And then your ovaries are on the side of that. But directly in that space are going to be those organs. And so naturally, just thinking about that, if one of those organs is irritated, there's only so much space. Do you get what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
So like they're going to fight for space. So if you are constipated, it's going to make that space smaller and potentially irritate your bladder.
Okay.
Right? And so if you're constipated and you're having penetrative sex and there's pain, okay, well, what positions are they pain? Is it because if you're having penetration, like, is it certain positions or every position? Or is it, then you can start thinking of it like, oh, what actually is hurting? Or like, where is this? Because bowel and bladder happen, one is affected the other one. They're not independent of each other. Add on menstruation. Right?
Yep.
So menstruation, you've got, if you have your uterus is on top of that, it connects to the sacrum, which is the backside of the pelvic bone, or the backside of the bowl. And that holds up the uterus. And so if you've got an irritated uterus, you can see how that could kind of pull on that area. And then that heaviness can put more heaviness into the pelvis. Does this make sense?
Yes. Yeah.
So I like to explain it almost like from like a physics or perspective of just simply, because we don't think of it that way. And that's exactly how we should think of it. I don't want to say should, right? But like we could think of it, or it could have been taught to think about. And so that can go a variety of ways. But then you also think too, like, what do you hear when you think of pelvic floor therapy before you've listened to my stuff? Like, what did you just think the term like was? Because like
Kegels.
Exactly. That's it, right?
Yeah.
That's it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, okay, now just what I described, how could Kegels be the only answer for that? Do you get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And so Kegels can help. Like, you do have ligaments that hold up those organs too. So that helps. But the pelvic floor strength can be affected as well, but it's just one portion of it. You know, on the top part, you've got your diaphragm, which is at the base of your ribs. So as you inhale, that pelvic floor lengthens. As you exhale, it comes up.
So if you were having a pelvic floor issue with any of those parts you were just laying out, like, could it affect breathing?
100%, yeah.
Because a big part of my work as a therapist is like talking a lot about breathing with people, because it's such a simple tool that we can have this control over our nervous system through the breaths that we take. And there's a lot of things that can make taking deep breaths difficult, but that's one that I wouldn't have ever really thought of.
I think part of it becomes difficult because, you know, we're told skinny is like, you know, you have to be thin, suck your stomach in, this, and this. And then what you've just observed and like what you can see in people is that we're breathing so much through our chest and neck. And actually those are our secondary breathing muscles. So when you're breathing through there, you'll actually feel more anxiety.
Yep.
Right. And so sometimes people be like, it doesn't work for me. I'm anxious. And then I look at their form and it's like, well, your body gets used to staying not like, as you inhale and exhale, the fascia. So the fascia is tissue that's on top of the muscle. And then add on if you've had any pelvic surgeries, right? So like the scars are going to limit that belly movement.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Add on top of it, slouch down and try to breathe through your belly. You can't do it because you can't expand as much. And then on top of that, if your ribs are restricted and the ribs are tight, and you're kind of in this forward position, we got to get more openness there too, right? So that's why breathing, it's not as simple. Sometimes it's just like, oh, just do this. Well, some people can just catch on like that, but some people have had multiple pelvic surgeries and the abdomen is super tight and restricted, and so they can't get that belly up to breathe.
Oh, yeah.
So if you feel like there's somebody that they're like, I can't get it, well, let's look at what's going on. And sometimes it's a coordination thing. Sometimes it just takes time. But yeah, there can be a variety of things that can kind of occur that limit that. And part of it is even just lack of body awareness as well, because we're not taught to slow down and just check in, like, what is my body telling me right now?
Yeah. Even thinking about the pelvic floor, like, I mean, obviously it's muscles. Like when you think about Kegels, you're like, yeah, that's a muscle. Like, that's like a rudimentary understanding. But when you're talking about like the uterus being on top and it's like it has to be held up like in some way,
right?
And like the positioning of everything, like now I am starting to piece together too why, you know, having a strong like relationship to the muscles in your core, in your lower back, like all of that can have a huge impact on like the pain that you are or you aren't experiencing.
Yeah,
because we're just holding those things up like all the time.
Think about this. Think about a hose, okay? So like say you've got a garden hose and like the end of it's coming out like crazy, right? So we're going to say that's the rectum and then the anus where poop comes out.
Okay.
So do you think the pressure will be less or more if there is a hole in that hose at the end? So in the hose, do you think the pressure at the end coming out will be more or less?
I think it would be less.
Yeah, because it's distributed, the pressure's going elsewhere, right?
Yeah.
So that's when abdominal strength kicks in with constipation, right?
Oh.
So we need this intra-abdominal pressure to kind of maintain kind of this inhale, exhale, pushing in and out when you're pooping. And so abdominals, if we don't have that pressure, that force, it's going to be harder to have a bowel movement or poop, right? So if you can kind of build up that strength there, then it's easier for that pressure to kind of push the poop out, right?
See, it's so interesting when you're talking about this too, because what like a refined, it's like painting this picture to me of this like refined sense of like body awareness and connection, and like that for some people, I mean, myself included in some ways, feels like crazy where I'm like, I can't even barely parse out what is going on in certain parts of my body, or how to, it's like you do one of those like body scan meditations, they have you clench different parts of your body.
Yeah.
And sometimes I'm like, how am I supposed to isolate this? Like, because we don't learn it.
Yeah.
We don't practice it growing up.
And then what happens is then you rely on external people telling you what it is. And yes, you need your healthcare team, right? But like evidence-based medicine is you, your provider, and their experience, the provider, you, and research.
Yeah.
And so if somebody's been dealing with something for a long time, I'll say, what do you think it is? Like, I know, I understand you're here for my professional opinion, and I'm going to give you that. But I also, let's tune into your intuition. Like, what do you think it is? Because nobody's going to tell you like you. Do you get what I'm saying?
Yes. Yeah.
And so then you can advocate for yourself more and get the right care if you even just have a basic level of knowledge. And that's why I'm so passionate about this, because what happens is then our own autonomy is handed off to somebody else that doesn't know us. They don't know what we've been through. We get 5 or 10 minutes with them.
Yep.
And then oftentimes, unfortunately, then we're gaslit.
Yeah, because they're just trying to connect the dots to something that they've learned or that they've heard before. And practitioners with a lot of experience, I mean, you've got 13 years of experience. You've seen stuff over and over again. But I'm sure there's also sometimes things that surprise you or are just nuanced for this person, or they just even need somebody to hear what their experience is like in their own words. And I feel like one of the things I kind of want to touch on, because I hear so much conversation now about like the gut-brain connection, the gut's like the second brain, all that. I kind of want to see what you think the pelvic floor connection is to our mental health. Like how do those things line up?
Yeah.
Physically, or even just when you're experiencing pain there, how does it impact the mental health? You can go either direction you want with it.
I actually think it's the opposite, right? So think about what happens to your body when you are going through something stressful.
Well, you're clenching. You're going to hold tightness.
Yeah. And a lot of people, we tend to hold tightness in our jaw and around our pelvic floor because, there's so many speculations on why this occurs. I believe it's kind of the entering and exiting of food, right? But then also it's protecting ourselves. So the exits are closed. Do you get what I'm saying?
Oh, yeah.
That's just kind of my theory on it. But your mental health and your physical reaction to things are going to be a direct correlation with some people don't have pelvic floor symptoms though. Like what I'm trying to say is that with the pelvic floor, if you're constantly dealing with issues out there and people aren't giving you answers, I want you to look at everything else in your life that's going on.
Yeah.
And how do you viscerally respond to different experiences? So like I'll say if just noticing like when think of a really good experience you've ever had in your life, like maybe a childhood experience that like, that actually makes you happy. For me, I have plenty that don't make me happy, a lot of childhood trauma, but like times that are happy, like there's something there, right? There's a feeling of happiness. There's a feeling of like feeling like you're a kid, freedom, whatever it is, or like an experience as an adult, anything that's like your safe place in your brain.
Yeah.
I want you to notice how your body feels with that versus something traumatic that has happened to you. And you'll find that people tense up in the areas where they have most of their symptoms, right? So like for me, I get a lot of symptoms of my TMJ and pelvic floor.
Yeah.
And then I feel the urge to pee. So then I'm like, okay, I'm having these symptoms. And I used to get more mad when I'd have them. And I'd be like, I'm a PT. I shouldn't have these symptoms. Right. You shame yourself.
I know that. Therapist.
Yeah.
If I have a breakdown.
And then I think, okay, what is my body trying to tell me versus why is this happening to me? And then you think, okay, well, what's going on? There are certain things your body is going to tell you, like certain stressors or things like that. It's like, okay, well, address those and see how you feel. And obviously then there's still the physical component where I release muscles and help people understand their bodies as well. But that's biomechanical. And I feel like that's what PTs are known for.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying is like, let's look at all of this, because by the time people see us, sometimes we see people with really chronic conditions for years and years and years and years. This is the first time they're hearing how their environment or things they're experiencing in their brain, the way they're thinking about things or trauma is directly affecting their body, you know?
Yeah, I love that kind of reframing too on, instead of like, why is this happening to me? To like, what is my body trying to tell me and how is it trying to serve me? How is it trying to help me? If you can imagine any way, people sometimes have a hard time with that question at first because it's like, they're like, it's not helping me, I'm in pain. And you're like, yes, but let's break it down to like, your body is not going to be trying to do things to hurt you just for no reason. Like it doesn't work that way. So if you can imagine why holding tension, clenching your pelvic floor, clenching your vagina, why would that be helpful? Or why would that feel safer to your body? Like what is going on? How are you responding? And are there situations in your past that are waiting to be healed and you're not going to feel safe until you're able to work through some of that? Or you won't feel safe, as consistently, or what's happening in your life now where you don't feel safe because something is going on. And so your body is responding, as it should, as it does, as an animal, as something reacting to all of the little sensory things in our environment too, that we're not even picking up on.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I was the worst at dissociating. Like I said, I'm a cancer survivor. I've dealt with anxiety majority of my life, complex PTSD. I'm not saying these things to just like willy-nilly just say them. I'm saying them because I know this works because I've literally lived it.
Yeah.
I've lived it in constant, I've blended this Eastern and Western medicine approach because I believe it is so powerful for the two, right? Western medicine saved my life. Eastern medicine helps my quality of life. You get what I'm saying? And so when you start tuning into your body, decisions become easier and easier to be made because, like, for instance, if you know that you're in a relationship or you're dating somebody or you have a friendship you're not sure about or whatever, and it's really been bothering you, it's one of those things to just kind of sit and be like, how do I feel when I'm around this person?
Yep. Yeah.
Do I feel like my authentic self or do I feel drained after?
Yep.
And eventually it's a pro and a con, because it's a pro because then you start paying attention to your body. It's a con because you're going to lose friendships.
Yep. You can't unsee it.
You can't unsee it, right? And then that energy, it's like, then if you deal with a chronic condition like myself, just the fatigue, you're just like, I don't have energy. Like I don't have there's only so much energy I have in a day and I can't use it on this. And even if you don't deal with the chronic condition, it's the same thing. And then you decide, is this worth my health?
Yeah.
Because you become eventually so sensitive to it, but it takes time over and over to kind of just check in and just be like, first of it is just noticing, how do you feel after you're around or in that situation, or this thing that happens at work, or when you do this or this. Yeah. Just notice. You don't have to do anything. You won't change anything. You don't have to. But eventually you'll get to a point where you're like, okay. Do you know what I'm saying?
It increases motivation over time, which is such a big, we have to have a little bit of time then it gets to kind of critical mass and then you're ready to take action.
Exactly.
And something you said was interesting because you're like, okay, is this person, is this situation, is this job worth my health, now or later down the line? And I think this is something I kind of wanted to touch on like, what are some of the things that women in particular can start doing at a young age for their pelvic floor health and like building this connection to serve not just now, but later down the line when some issues can maybe be more severe because it has become chronic.
Educate yourself, like find people that you trust, like, because there's a lot of information out there. There's a lot of people that aren't in healthcare that are calling themselves pelvic specialists too. Like, you got to be careful with that. You got to look at who to even know who to trust, even when you're looking, right? Are they based on fear? Are they scaring you? How do you feel after you listen to their content? Do you feel empowered or do you feel defeated? Right? So finding out, and then it goes back to the energy thing, right? And so my biggest thing is just understanding, open an anatomy book, just start understanding your cycle. What phase of cycle are you in? Are you tracking it? Do you know what these different phases mean? Do you understand how different changes can happen? And it's nothing, you don't have to do anything too crazy. You're just noticing. You're just noticing. Like, what phase are you in right now, right? Are you noticing, oh, when that month was really stressful, my period is normally 28 days, but that time it was 21. Okay. I can start noticing I've had a lot of stress. When I stress, my period gets affected, right?
Yeah.
So then number one is just bringing it into awareness. Just that. And educating yourself.
And giving language. I mean, I absolutely love what you said about even checking in on the people you're learning from.
Yeah.
How do I feel? Like it's starting that check-in process just from the get-go with, is this person scaring me? Because you can get information from a lot of different sources now with the internet, but you don't have to get information from somebody that scares you. You can find another option.
But there's a lot because it's clickbait.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
It will grow followers fast.
It'll grow followers fast, but yeah, it's like what we were talking about before too. It's like,
I don't want that.
Yeah. You don't want that. And there are a lot of people like you that are out there trying to do something different. Maybe it takes a little bit more searching, but I think it's worth the search to find somebody that's not going off of your fear.
Mm-hmm.
And what you were saying about, even just like how you described the pelvic floor as like a bowl and the front and the back and the uterus is on top, even understanding the anatomy of that, how it's laid out, going in, if you are having an issue, to a doctor, to a health practitioner, and having some of that language, knowing the phases of the period, knowing all that, unfortunately, it shouldn't be our responsibility to be able to use the terms that are going to catch doctors' attention.
You have to.
But at this point, like, that is helpful.
You are your own advocate.
Yeah, and anybody that's listening to that does go to therapy, this is also something you can always talk to your therapist about too, preparing to go to the doctor, preparing how to speak succinctly and using terms that will catch the doctor's attention. And I hate that that's, kind of necessary right now, but
it's where our healthcare system is, unfortunately.
It is where it's at. And luckily, with the internet, you do have the ability, a little more so now, to really find terminology for some of the stuff that you're going for, or even start to have a way to really explain it. Because, as you know, women, or I guess maybe like the feminine energy or the qualities that are thought of to be like more feminine, it's more qualitative, it's more descriptive, it's more feelings, it's more like, I don't know, there was just a vibe with that person. If you go into a doctor and you're like trying to describe what's going on in your body with like the feeling terms, they're
not going to take a vibe.
They're not going to take a vibe check on your pelvic floor.
Check. Like I have a vibe that my pelvic floor is off.
I have a vibe. And it's like, it's the way that I think a lot of women do know how to express their experience. And you can talk to other women sometimes too, maybe more so on like the friend aspect, that they'll get it, you're describing it, and they're like, no, I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah. Like I feel that, and it is a lot more abstract, but that doesn't work.
It doesn't work
for the healthcare system.
Well, I also have more hope like with your generation, because I'm like a late millennial, and I feel like we still struggle with a lot of shame and guilt even around. I think this can happen of all generations. There's a lot of shame and guilt even just around the genital region, right? Because there's society, for women, you see even just on social media or celebrities, women are damned if they do, they're damned if they don't, yep. Right? And so, you're too sexual, you're not sexual enough, or this or that. And so you're getting all these messages that we should have shame around our bodies and all these things. And just to keep quiet, be a good girl, because we don't want to upset anybody. But I'm here to say, if I didn't advocate for myself, I could not be here. Yeah. And that was the point where I was like, this has changed my life. As much as cancer sucked, it healed me, which is really insane to say, but I'm a different person. And so the way that people can advocate for themselves, I'll give you an example. This is a great example. So if you've been dealing with like maybe chronic hip pain, okay, say you're a person with a uterus, you're dealing with chronic hip pain, and you go in and you're like, hey, I've been having hip pain. Okay, well, standard of care will be like, you go to, maybe most people think they need to go straight to ortho, which isn't the case. You can go straight to a PT, but sometimes people want that, and that's their decision. Yeah. And so say you go, ortho is predominantly male, like very, very male-oriented orthopedic surgeons, which is just the industry. And you're like, hey, I actually have this hip pain, and it mainly occurs on this day of my cycle. Yeah. it hurts with these movements, but I notice every day on this day on my cycle. That conversation, could be hit or miss. I don't know how that person's going to respond, but you're going to get a different response than I've got hip pain. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Because ovaries are right there by your hip flexor, right? And so then, okay, well, then that might be something that the reality is they might be like, go to your OB, right?
Yeah.
And then your OB might be like, I don't know, da, da, da. And then you're like, okay, well, my end result is go to pelvic floor PT. That's orthopedic experience. But in and of itself is my point, is that you're adding more data to the equation that they don't have time to calculate.
Yep.
And so you're doing the calculations, you're doing it on your own, and you're advocating for yourself. Even if they had all the time in the world, it doesn't matter. We should, and I say should because we all should take the time to learn to know our bodies. But that also takes time, right? Like
Yeah.
I failed. There's certain parts of my body that I have to like reconnect with, and it's just taking the time to know and assessing how you're feeling. Because if you don't know and you're like, I'm fine, then you're operating at this high level of anxiety and stress that you don't even know what it's like to check in with your body. And so I've noticed like the past few weeks, my skin's been breaking out a bit more. I'm a little bit more fatigued, a little bit more irritable. And I'm like, okay, I got to check in with myself. What's going on?
Yep.
Right. And so I don't say these things because I'm perfect at it. I mean, I'm constantly working at it, and I used to get more mad at myself that I wouldn't recognize these things. And I have to accept that we're all human. We're all imperfect people trying to just
and
live.
there's a reason why it's adaptive to not recognize them and to not be good at it. You have chronic fatigue.
Yeah.
Maybe you've had some experience of being gaslit or not being kind of listened to about that experience, or you've just never really shared it with people because you don't want to be seen as like dramatic or complaining.
I've been told to try harder.
Yeah. You get things like that. So what's the response? Well, it's like, well, then I'll try less to pay attention to this. And I'll just kind of push it down. And I think one of the things I wanted to touch on, because I know that this is a big part of the conversation right now for a lot of women, like how long things like endometriosis or PCOS can go without being diagnosed and have, horrible pain, or like even just the normalization of this high level of pain with periods that in some cases is just, it shouldn't be happening. Like it's something else is going on. But I wonder, kind of your experience, what common causes you see for women's pain is, or, maybe some of the things that go untreated or just kind of lived with because people don't believe that there's anything that you can do about it.
Yeah. Don't you think it's weird? It's 2024 and like we have no male birth control. And we don't even know endometriosis and PCOS.
Yeah.
Those are main issues that cause infertility, but yet it's mind blowing, right? And I could go on and on about that stuff, but like your question was more of how these things can affect their periods. Yeah.
Yeah. And like how people, like women that come into your office for the first time, kind of what I know experience can range vastly, but what are some of the things where maybe you see them maybe undermining their experience a little bit, or like, well, I don't know, I've dealt with this, but I know periods can be painful, or I know like, maybe there's just something else going on. Like what's some of the common things you hear people talking about where you're like, wait, hold up. Like,
that painful periods are normal, that, it just happens once, a month or whatever. There's that. We play it down a lot because we're told to be quiet. So what happens is the society's kind of expectations of women bleeds into their health. And thinking about how is that going to show up if you show up to a meeting and you're a female and there's 10 male people in the meeting and you're the only female. Just immediately, how do you think your body's going to react right now? Would you feel 100% comfortable?
Well, no.
Exactly, right?
Yeah.
If you walked into a room for a bunch of women and they all acted like you, looked like you, all the things, you might feel more at ease. Yeah?
That's why I like my job. I
Yeah.
work with a lot of women.
Yeah. The men can be great. It's indifferent of them. I'm not hating on men. I'm actually saying that immediately we go into that because it's a field that was not made for us. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yeah.
And so what I'm saying is, I'm not saying to quit your job if you're in tech. I'm not saying these things. I'm just saying support your body and notice when you feel those things. Like maybe if you've had a stressful day at work, you've had difficult conversations, or you've been gaslit when you go to the doctor. Do you get what I'm saying? Like, we're living in a world that isn't made for us. And I'm not trying to make it like men versus women. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying it doesn't even benefit men either if we're talking binary,
Yeah,
right?
right.
So then, because then they suppress their emotions and then deal with their own stuff. And so I'm saying it more from a point of view of like, we have to check in with our bodies because we're constantly inundated with feelings and stressors and like these things day to day that affect our bodies. Does that make sense?
Yep. Yeah.
And we are two white women. Add on if we were not white, right? Then there's cultural expectations, there's racism, there's all these different things, right? And that's why you see those healthcare costs rise for people that are not white.
Yeah.
Right. And so you're looking at it from a multifactorial thing. So if we're constantly in this state of stress, then eventually we start having more symptoms, right? So maybe
Yep.
you just have a regular job and you feel comfortable at the job, but then you're working 60 hours a week, you know, your partner's traveling, the kids are at home. A lot of that stuff falls on women still, too, right? So we're looking at it from like, hey, how much stuff we're taking on? A lot, and trying to push through, and that ultimately is affecting us. It's affecting our bodies physically, and then that increases cortisol in our bodies, which increases blood sugar, which can cause weight gain, we know blood sugar increasing can increase endometriosis symptoms. It can be painful, right? And so then that can also increase insulin resistance, which is a major issue in PCOS. Do you get what I'm saying?
Yeah. I mean, it's just like domino effect. Like it's
boom, 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 boom.
all connected. I think this popped into my head when you were talking about that. Something I like to ask people sometimes is if you could like picture in your mind's eye your body, yourself as it is now. It's like you're looking at yourself and you imagine all of the stress that you're under or everything that you're feeling in that moment as like physical expressions on your body. Like, okay, think about, you know, the recent breakup you just went through. Like, imagine that as like literally your arm is like in a cast, or you could see some other body part, you know, that represents it more. And then be like, what are you looking at now? Like, how broken would your body like appear, or like how hurt would it look if we could see what's going on? And I think that would start to connect to like, okay, if the picture you're seeing in your mind, there's a lot going on, there's a lot of weight you're carrying, even if it's easier for you to imagine like holding bags and how weighed down are you, then it's like starting connected to the pelvic floor. It's like, well, that's, you know, how could that weight that you're feeling mentally, emotionally be showing up in your body, be pulling you down, be, you know, expressing itself physically in your cells, in the symptoms, in the, you know, even the flaring of certain symptoms that maybe were better for a while, and then they come back and they're worse, and you're like, you know, why is this worse? What am I doing wrong? You know, I was doing so good, and there's so much self-blame around that. And it's like, well, what's happening for you now? And like, can you picture if you were a person showing all of this physically where the rest of the world could see, how would you be treated differently, and how would you treat yourself differently?
Oh, it's totally different. I mean, you know, I have two brothers that are in wheelchairs, and you can immediately see that they're disabled, right? Or they're not able to walk. And so it's just like immediately people understand, or they think they do. That's a whole nother thing too, is they're mistreated because of that. But you think about it from a perspective of health isn't just when you go into the doctor's office, it's everything in your life. Think about this. I think it's part of it is people might think, because when I heard this, I was like, how the hell are they connected? That's not possible. Like, it's just not, I didn't believe it.
Yeah.
Which is insane.
Like the mind-body connection?
Yeah, I didn't believe it.
Oh, you were like,
it's like, it's all biomechanical. Your knee hurts, this is why.
Yeah.
And then when people would say they went, it didn't, like, that was the way I was taught, right? And then as I kind of stopped this fear-based thing of this ego of I know everything, and there's all that shit in healthcare, especially in physical therapy too. Like if you get a second opinion, people could get their panties getting a wad and stuff. And it's like, just let the people do what they're going to do, right? Yeah. But think about your conscious brain. So your conscious brain is allowing me and you to talk and think about our conversation, and I'm able to respond to you. My subconscious brain is beating my heart for me, is breathing for me. Blood is running through my body right now. Oxygen is being diffused. I don't have to think about it. It's just done, right? So the subconscious brain is what holds all of that trauma. So like those areas your body remember. And that's why sometimes your body knows better than your brain knows.
Yeah.
And that goes to show with even in therapy too. In the therapy I do, it's like, well, okay, if you're not sure about this person, how do you feel in your body around them?
Mm-hmm.
But then that can almost go into the whole other route, because if you're used to trauma,
Yeah.
that can feel familiar, right? So
yeah.
there's more of that. But the point is more of you're just kind of checking in. And so that's why the subconscious brain is doing its own thing that sometimes our conscious brain is completely unaware of. And that's where all of our beliefs and our fear and our actions actually, they're so deep rooted that's why we have to go to therapy or work on ourselves in some capacity to override the default patterns that have been learned.
Well, because I think a good way to kind of like exemplify this a little bit too is like, you know, if you think about some physical issue, maybe, you know, you have one hip that like flares up sometimes when you go on walks, like it's kind of your problem hip or your problem knee. You hear people talk about that. That is something that's been like habituated, you know, some kind of pattern been reinforced over time. And so if you think like, well, maybe I start to notice when I'm stressed, I sit in this way that's like I'm trying to, you know, I mean, our organs are on different sides of our body too. So you can even go like really crazy and like trauma response of like trying to protect the body. Or maybe you've had, you know, a past injury or something like that gets connected to this part of your body. So when you're stressed, you frequently sit in this way that compensates for it. Mm-hmm. Then you start having pain in that part of your body because it's just been habituated over and over. But you can see how really even just the physical mechanism, it did start in the mind. It started, you know, in some cases, it starts with the way that you're holding your body based off of the experiences you've had in the past that have had an emotional impact on you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And it's also that too. I think that it depends how, you know, into Eastern medicine and stuff you want to go. But, you know,
I love it.
But. Okay. Well, like, for instance, like I've chronically had neck issues and sore throat, and it's not a coincidence that it's all
throat
here.
Chakra.
It's the throat chakra. And like some people might roll their eyes when you hear it, and that's fine. But I also was like, I've done everything for these things, and I'm a PT, and people can't figure this out. I can't figure out. I got to look at some alternative way. And when I realized I wasn't speaking my truth, because I'd explained to you, I just realized this past year I grew up in a really intense Catholic cult. And I was never allowed to speak my truth. And so essentially, and then add on being gaslit in the healthcare system and almost being told you're not doing the right things over and over, you just kind of shut down and keep it all in.
Yeah, and the energy, it just, it's getting stuck and lost. It's
Cancer was right here, right? Collarbone, yeah.
It's just not being able to be exercised and processed out. Mm-hmm. And so it just builds up. Yeah, I mean, that makes a ton of sense to me. And I love kind of bringing in that lens too, because this is the same thing we're talking about this whole time for people listening. And this is always what I want to do with my podcast. And I know you want to do this with yours as well, of like, just information, just think about it. Like if you're not into the chakras and you're like, okay, whatever, that's fine.
I was definitely there. But then, yeah, you deal with enough chronic issues that, you know, not everybody's ready for it to hear it. But you just think about, you can't help but feel somebody's energy when you're with them, right? You pay attention. Just if somebody's anxious, you're likely going to feel anxious, or if you're calm, that person might take on your calmness, right? And so when you go back to like the foundations of what we're made of, right? Basically like energy, water, all these things, like if things aren't flowing as freely, right? And we're so restricted and we're just not speaking our truth, or we're not doing things that we enjoy, ultimately it expresses in our body at some point in our life. And either that can be, if you don't even have any physical symptoms, maybe it's in the relationships around you, maybe it's your mental health. It has to go somewhere. It's a pressure valve. Eventually it has to go off.
Yep.
And we're not taught how to check in before that valve happens, because you don't see the value in it. Until that. Do you get what I'm saying?
Yeah, right. Yeah. Most of the time it has to be consequences to then be like, oh yeah. This would be valuable for me to do.
What I think ultimately my biggest goal is just start paying attention to your body. Notice how your environment affects your health. It's not just your eating and exercise. I was eating turmeric smoothies every morning, exercising regularly when I was diagnosed with cancer, everything. But I was in a very toxic relationship. I had just started my practice. I was not paying attention to my body. I was go, go, go. I was fulfilling the subconscious belief that if I'm not working nonstop, then I'm not lovable.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah. And then something literally came in and was like, you have to stop.
Yep.
I feel like that is such a good kind of note to end off for anybody listening to kind of sit after and take in and think about, because I also struggle with the like, working is
I do to this day. It's a big struggle. Yeah.
I'm productive and then I'm doing things and and I am doing workouts that are good for my body and trying to eat healthy, and so I'm checking the boxes. But do I pause to like sit with something when I feel like it actually, emotionally hits? Like a bad day at work, sometimes coming home where I'm like, oh, that was so hard. Like I feel so much imposter syndrome, or I feel, so much stress over my ability to do this job, that the first thing my brain wants to do is like, learn more, do more. Like, come on, let's make sure you can be better. When it's like, actually, there's things, little emotions knocking at the door inside of me that are like, can you like take a second,
take a beat,
and actually feel what's going on?
Yeah. Or just when you have those days, what do you want to do right when you get home, right? Basically,
lay on the floor.
Then lay on the floor. Yeah. And I used to push myself on those days to do really hard workouts.
Yeah.
Some people respond well to that. I don't. I actually get more fatigue. So instead I go on a walk outside. I do some gentle movement, maybe some light stretching. But then if you find yourself that you're constantly in that, right? Then we got to look at what's the bigger picture on top of that. And so, like I said, I'm not a psychotherapist, but my biggest thing is blending that mind-body connection physically and how it manifests in chronic illness, chronic pain. So we get really complicated cases. And this is the first thing that I'm sitting down and talking to them about.
That's amazing.
And making sure they have somebody on their team that's a psychotherapist, or make sure that they're talking to somebody that is, because I'm kind of guiding from like a lifestyle standpoint, but I can't be like, oh, let's process your trauma like that. That's you got to go to, I didn't go to school for that. I'm more just noticing how those things happen in your body, educate yourself, and then you can advocate better.
I love that.
Yeah.
So where can people find you?
Yeah, so they can find me on Instagram and TikTok. So on Instagram, it's drmarypt.
Okay.
And then on TikTok, I'm the Vagina Doc on TikTok.
That's good.
Yeah. And then I have a podcast called Sex and Wellness with Dr. Mary. And I talk a lot about this. I also talk a lot about Eastern, Western medicine treatments. I have people on there that are surgeons all the way to, intuitive healers and all the different things, because I believe this is a beautiful blend that a lot of people should have access to. So I'd love it if you guys could listen to some of those episodes, and you're going to be on mine. So you'll see. Yeah. And Oh, and then if you're in Austin, Texas, I do have a physical therapy clinic, an orthopedic and physical therapy clinic. We're Resilient RX, and we treat everything from pelvic floor dysfunctions to shoulder pain, neck pain, all of the above. So it's been great. And a lot of it's empowering people, especially in their perimenopausal phases of life, and understanding the changes, how that can affect your body physically, and how to help address those symptoms. So
awesome. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
It was so great to have you.
Yeah.